Thank you all for being here this morning. I got an email this morning from, I guess, Dean Crown now. We have to call Anthony, who's was planning to be here this morning, but I don't know, some blah, blah, blah about an all deans, blah, blah. It got very academic. I stopped reading it. You know, it's great to still have Anthony downtown, and really, Anthony was a terrific resource to us in the city council as we worked on complicated issues like lobbying laws and campaign finance reform, and he was a great partner to us, and it's great having him still here in downtown Manhattan. And this law school, which has been the law school that our minority leader went to, Jimmy Otto, a lot of folks in government have been able to get law degrees while going to school at night and still working through New York Law School, and you are just a great resource to all of us at City Hall. So I just want to thank Anthony and everybody here for that. And I just want to particularly also mention, I know Anthony is launching a new public service scholarship program and a new Center for Business and Financial Law, and we just want to applaud him for that and his efforts to grow this institution to an even stronger, better place and give folks the opportunity to move on to law degrees as they've figured while working that that's something that they need to do. I also want to thank, I see lots of different folks from the administration here, our finance commissioner, our deputy chancellor, Kathleen Grimm, a bunch of other folks, so thank you all for being here. So I hate to start on an antagonistic note after Ross's lovely introduction, but I do want to pat the council on the back a little bit in that we had an important victory yesterday in the courts as it relates to the mayor's homeless policy. But let me first just say, you know, one of the things that I've tried to do in the past 7 years is get as much done as we could possibly get done. And if you're going to get things done in government, that means the legislature and the executive have to work together. And it means when you can't work together, you have to do it agreeably. Now, about a year or so ago, we ended up doing something fairly unorthodox, taking Mayor Bloomberg to court over this policy I'll talk about in a second. Somebody asked me at one point what that meant about my relationship with the mayor. I said, nothing, we're not dating. It means we disagree on homeless policy. Next, let's move on. And I remember telling the mayor that story, and he laughed like crazy because it was like, right, you can't agree on everything. But as long as you actually feel strongly about what your thing is that you disagree on and do it agreeably, you can continue to work collaboratively and go from that one room where you disagreed into the next room where you're going to agree. This issue was one where the Department of Homeless Services wanted to take a policy that Mayor Giuliani had put in place around screening homeless families in a manner that I thought when Giuliani did it was mean-spirited and overly aggressive and counterproductive, because the vast majority of families who get rejected because they didn't quote-unquote prove that they had nowhere else to go actually reapply and end up coming right back. So all it does is delay their time in the shelter system and put them clearly in a worse place. But for us in the council, the issue was more specific, in that we believed when the mayor's office, Department of Homeless Services, wanted to apply this same rule to homeless singles, it was a rule. It needed to go through rulemaking. Needed to go through the city. No, what the heck? Yeah, what does it stand for? Okay, Citywide Administrative Procedure Act. I can never remember all the letters, but CAPA, because that's how you make rules, how agencies make rules. And the process of rulemaking is extremely important to us in the council, because we often in legislation will say this has to be implemented through an agency's rulemaking process. So if an agency is not holding rulemaking to the highest level of transparency in the letter of the law, it undercuts our ability as the legislature to write laws, because we often write laws with a leap of faith that the agency is going to implement them as prescribed under the provisions of CAPA. That didn't happen here. Now, the Coalition for the Homeless, Legal Aid Society will tell you this is a violation of the Callahan decision, of which I agree with that, and I share their substantive concerns. But for us, it was about this rulemaking. And the court yesterday ruled unanimously that, in fact, we were right, that the mayor's office had violated rulemaking and therefore could not implement this new policy. So from my perspective, it's a very significant victory for homeless families. But it's also an important victory for the balance of power and democracy, and that government has to be conducted in an open and transparent way. And I really want to just give a big shout out to our general counsel's office. Liz Fine, our general counsel, is here, and her chief litigator, Jeff Metzler, who was the one who actually won the case yesterday and really did a terrific job. So congratulations to Liz and Jeff Metzler. Those of you who are lawyers, you'll have to get more specifics on the legal stuff from Liz, but it was an important, I think, victory. Let me just talk quickly about two other general things, and then I'd be happy to take folks' questions. On Monday, as I said, I gave my State of the City speech, and which will be my final State of the City speech as speaker. And what we laid out in that speech was what we hope a blueprint for focus and forward motion for the middle class in New York City and those who are aspiring and working so hard to get into the middle class. On Monday morning, in advance of the speech, we released a report called The Middle Class Squeeze, which did an analysis of where the middle class is. And we're using basically, say, $65,000 to $175,000 for a family of four to define middle class in New York City. Our middle class has a 6.2% unemployment rate today. If you compare that to other points of where this level or time of recovery out of a recession to other similar times in coming out of a recession, it is a much higher unemployment rate than usual. One of the challenges there is that good middle class paying jobs are not as many as there used to be. Two, the report showed that the affordability level in this city is also rising. So in addition to having an employment challenge, you have an affordability crisis, with housing topping the list as the most expensive thing. Unfortunately, not so far behind childcare. On average, New Yorkers are spending $19,000 a year on childcare. So that's why in the speech we laid out a 4-point plan for developing what I believe would be the biggest middle-class housing program in 2 generations, the biggest middle-class housing program since Mitchell-Lama. Part of that is more aggressively working to preserve every housing unit we have. Part of that is taking the 100,000, working towards taking the 100,000 units in this city of rental housing that are on the verge of foreclosure and kind of structural collapse, bringing those back. 3, it's new construction and putting in allocations from the capital budget, actually borrowing. This is a time to responsibly borrow given how low the interest rates are, redirecting other unspent and allocated money in the capital budget to this effort, which I just think is so important. Also using property tax caps and other techniques to convert units that are market rate to affordability for the middle class, but trying to do also all of this with something we've never really done on this level before, a great deal of this housing becoming permanently affordable. So we don't repeat the mistakes of Mitchell-Lama where you 20 or 30 years from now have your kind of home pulled out from under you. We've also proposed that to deal with the child care challenge, we've introduced legislation in Albany to create a child care tax credit. Right now, the tax credit basically taps out in the city level at folks making $30,000, which is, we need that, but that's obviously not particularly helpful for most middle-class families. We would propose raising that to about $180,000. You pair that with the pre-existing state and federal ones after our credit goes through, that could be a savings of $2,040 for the average New Yorker, which is actually a really helpful amount of money. Now, there's another thing we talked about in this speech that I really want to underscore, because the things I just mentioned are important, and we need to do them, and we need to work immediately for them. But there's something in the speech we talked about that is on literally a time clock. I know we were all thrilled when President Obama put in place the opportunity for the young dreamers, as we call them, to stay in the United States. But to do that, you have to be enrolled in an educational program. Now, as many people in this room, Kathleen Grimm and others can tell you, is our adult education programs have waiting lists. It's a good thing so many people want to go back to adult education. It's bad we don't have enough seats. But there's about 16,000 New Yorkers who will end up getting deported if we do not create these adult education opportunities for them. It's that simple. And that's why we're proposing we allocate $13 million next year to expanding adult education with the opportunity for these immigrants to get into those classes and then get to stay in New York City. It's not a huge amount of money, it's not a small amount of money, but it's that important, and we will miss this opportunity and miss having those immigrants as a permanent legal part of our city moving forward. So that's something I think we all really need to seize this opportunity on. Let me just move off of the state of the city for 1 second and just say something about Hurricane Sandy. We are in the process now, I think we're about halfway through what in the end will be about a dozen oversight hearings on the city's response to Hurricane Sandy. And that's important, not to say anybody did anything wrong, but because we went through something, and Joan Cusick can tell you, who's led the efforts on Staten Island with our great borough president there. And I was actually just out in Fox Beach last week, and boy, you want to talk about strong people. You want to talk people with fortitude, but we need to be as tough and harsh, hard on ourselves as we should be to make sure, not saying we did anything wrong, but that we are prepared the next time, because you don't get to say twice, this was unprecedented. You only get to say that once. And these oversight hearings are really designed, and the mayor's office is going to come out with reports too to figure out how we can do it better. But we also need to remain focused, even as the months move away from Sandy, on the work that needs to be done. We're lucky that President Obama has appointed HUD Secretary Sean Donovan from Brooklyn, I'm just saying, to head a regional rebuild. In the month after Hurricane Sandy, the mayor and I re-impaneled, if you will, the Building Resiliency Task Force on an emergency basis, gave them a 6-month charge to come back to us with an update on the building code and flood standards, so we learn what we need to learn. We've always put the boilers and the electricity in the basement, and we all get why we did that. Who wants to take, if you're a developer, the 4th floor where you could rent apartments or offices and put it there? Well, we now learned you'll pay one way or the other, right? So maybe it's better to just plan that way. We learned through looking at things like the Sims plan that when you raise property up, it makes a difference and can preserve structures. We need to make those changes now a permanent part of our building code. We also need to commit to actually implementing a comprehensive system of barriers around New York City. We need to harden the exterior of New York City. Some of those will be man-made barriers. Some of those will be blue belts. Some of it will be duning. Some of it will be oyster beds. Some of it may be places like Fox Beach that will get bought out. People won't rebuild their homes. It'll become part of the blue belt. That has to happen. Now, unlike Stamford, Connecticut, there's no one wall we can put up. That's enough. But we can create a network. We also need to put better structure and redundancy into the systems that failed us during the storm. 16% of New York City's electrical power comes from overhead lines. 50% of the people who were out of power during Storm Sandy, some for weeks on end, were people who had overhead lines. That's why we passed legislation in the council to begin the process of coming up with the plan that will show us how, in a prioritized fashion, to begin putting those power lines underground. We need to create redundancy in our gasoline system and in our telecommunications system. You know, immediately during the storm, AT&T and T-Mobile went to network sharing. If you had AT&T or T-Mobile, you probably had service. How often do you hear people say, you know, I am so happy I have T-Mobile? Never. You heard that during the storm. Verizon needs to commit to do the same, which they have yet to do. So all of this, whether it's building housing for the middle class and those trying to get into it, figuring out a child care tax credit so people who are lucky enough to have 2 jobs can go to work, families that have 2 jobs can go to work without real worry about being able to pay the bills or the quality of their child care, making sure we keep this an immigrant city, making sure we create jobs and economic development like we talked about in the speech, or making sure we actually respond with as much grace and dignity and fortitude as those folks who were hit so hard by Sandy. That's some, but a very, very much important work that lies ahead of us in the weeks and months and years. And I just want to thank all of you for being part of this structure in government or your civic or academic involvement, and would be happy to take your questions on any of this or any other stuff you're interested in. So thank you all for being here this morning.